By the way, Mr. Ustinov, do you know what you're going to do in the show? Do you know what you're going to do in the show? Ursäkta. Vet du vad du kommer att göra i showen?
Nej. Eddie Skoller.
Be or not to be, that's a question, but not to me. 'Cause I know I'll always be in love with you. I see that you're the one, and I'm positive you'll agree. 'Cause I'll always love you just the way I do. I will put it like Mr. Romeo when he entered the balcony. He said, Juliet, my fiancée, how would you like to marry me? To be or not to be, that's a question, but not to me. 'Cause I know that very soon we'll be a happy, 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 happy family. A happy family. Tack ska ni ha och välkomna. Har ni någonsin tänkt på att nästan all humor riktar sig mot minoriteter? Har ni tänkt på det? Det var en svensk som var på besök i New York, en affärsman som var på besök i New York, och så gick han i lunchtid promenerade i Central Park, och så passerade han en bänk där det satt en svart man och läste Svenska Dagbladet. Och så stoppade han och sa, excuse me, but I couldn't help seeing that you read in Svenska Dagbladet. Are you Swedish? Så tog mannen tidningen ner och sa, I'm black, isn't that enough? Men varför är det så? Varför är det så att humorn riktar sig mot minoriteter? Det är väl kanske för att minoriteter sticker mera ut. De syns helt enkelt mera. Eller också är det för att det alltid är mera roligt att skämta med andra. Det var en skolklass där skolfröknen sa, lille Peter, kan du stava till ko? K, C, K, C, O, C, O, C, K. Det var bra, Peter. Och lille Fredrik, kan du stava till is? I, C, I, C, S, C, S, C, is. Det var bra, Peter. Och lille Ahmed, kan du stava till rasdiskriminering? Men mycket ofta uppstår humorn hos minoriteten själva för att överleva. Eller hos omgivningen för att försvara minoriteten. Det var en liten jude som satt på ett fik för att få en kopp kaffe och en smörgås. Så kom det in en stor man, så tog honom upp och slog honom och kastade honom över borden. Så kom den lilla mannen upp och sa, vad gör ni, vad gör ni, vad gör ni? Det var er judar som slog ihjäl Jesus. Ja, men det var 2000 år tillbaka. Det skiter jag väl i, jag hörde det inte förrän igår. Det finns mycket lidande som medför humor också. Enligt gammalt judisk ordspråk så säger man, om du är hungrig, sjung. Om du är rädd, skratta. Det är också mycket humor som man kan lära sig något av. Det var Moshe som var sin granne skyldig 50 000. Han kunde inte sova. Han kunde inte betala. Och han gick upp och ner golvet. Så stod Sara upp och så sa hon, vad är det, Moshe, vad är det? Så jag kan inte sova, jag skulle Isak 50 000, jag har inte 50 000. Så gick hon över, öppnade fönstret och ropade, Isak, Isak, Isak. Och Isak kom fram med sin nattluva på och sa, ja, vad är det Sara, vad är det? Moshe skulle dig 50 000. Ja, jag vet, han ska betala imorgon. Han har inte 50 000. Så stängde hon fönstret och sa, Moshe, nu kan du sova, nu kan Isak inte sova. Ja, vi ska varna om naturen. Och det visste även H.C. Andersen. För mer än 150 år tillbaka skrev han om hur vi skulle varna om våra träd. Så han var liksom dåtidens trädkramare, kan man säga. Det här är en dansk visa som heter Det gamle træ og lad det stå. Den har fått ny musik av en dansk fin kompositør som heter Sebastian. Det gamle træ, og lad det stå, det må I ikke fælde. Så mange ting, det husker på, hvad kan det ikke melde? Vi det så fuldt med blomster så, de friske grene hælde. Det gamle træ, og lad det stå, det må I ikke fælde. Nu vil jeg da på vandring gå, men det kan jeg fornemme. Man rejser ud for hjem at nå, for bedst er det dog hjemme. Når træet her har blomster på, det vil min hjemkomst melde. Det gamle træ, og lad det stå, det må I ikke fælde. Når træet her har blomster på, det vil min hjemkomst melde. Det gamle træ, og lad det stå, det må vi aldrig fælde. Förstod ni den text? Det gjorde ni. Eller det mesta av den. Men även om man inte förstår all text så finns det mycket man kan lyssna på i andra språk. Det finns rytmer, det finns musik i språken. När vi gjorde den här programserien för 2 år tillbaka, då hade jag varit ute på ett ställe här utanför Göteborg. Ett ställe som heter Tjörn. Känner ni till det? Ja, det heter Tjörn på samma som kyssa här, får du veta. Tjörn. Var det rätt? Ja. Då kan jag också kyssa. Men när jag kom tillbaka, jag tyckte det var mycket fint. Och så sa vår kapellmästare Kurt Erik, så sa han, men det är fint där ute du. Det är fint där ute du. För mig lät det som en trompetfanfar. Da, 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 da. Det är fint där ute du. Sen har jag också kommunicerat lite med en norsk. Och en dag så skulle jag steka en kyckling. Och så sa jag Karoli Vidløg. Som på danska betyder tycker om vitlök. Men hon tyckte det lät precis som en tromfigur. Liksom Karoli Vidløg, baff, 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 Karoli Vidløg, baff, 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 Karoli Vidløg, baff, baff, baff. Sen skulle hon fråga om jag hade vänt på kycklingen, så sa hon, snudde du den? Va? Snudde du den? Så tänkte jag på att en bil på dansk slang, det är en dytt. Liksom dytt. Så om man skulle kommunicera dansk-norsk och man skulle fråga om man har vänt på bilen, så skulle det vara snudde dytten. Så jag har försökt att göra lite musik ut av det här. Karoli Vidløg, Karoli Vidløg, Jajamän, det är fint där ute du, karolidulaj. Snudududududen, baff, baff, karolidulaj. Karolidulaj, yeah, karolidulaj. Jajamän, det är fint där ute du, karolidulaj. Snudududududen, morn, morn, snudududududen, morn, morn, karolidulaj. Tack ska ni ha. Tack så mycket. My guest tonight is one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. He reminds me of an old, wise Chinese philosopher. And inside this philosopher, there's a curious 4-year-old child imitating everything he sees and everything he hears. And inside the little child, there's a big man with an even bigger heart. This man I've chased for 2.5 years to make him be in the show. But he's always been too busy writing, directing, acting, doing charity work for the UNICEF, all sorts of things. But 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes before we had the press conference for this show, I made a last desperate attempt and called. The phone was answered, yes. I said, I would like to speak to Mr. Ustinov. Speaking. I am Eddie Skoller. Oh yes, I guess I've got quite a few letters from you lately. But look, right now, in 3 minutes, there's a press conference where we're going to inform the press who's going to be in the show. Do you want to participate? Of course. Go tell them. That would be a perfect timing, wouldn't it? So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sir Peter Ustinov. So, here you are.
Here I am and ready to speak Swedish.
When were you last in Sweden? That's...
In Sweden, the last time I was in Gothenburg, and the only time I was in Gothenburg, was 1946. Yes.
Has it changed?
I didn't see it well enough then to recognize it again now. But I came in just after the war, when I came out of the army, and in a car made in 1937, I arrived in Stavanger and drove here through Grimstad, Arendal, Porsgrunn, Oslo, Moss, Uddevalla, and Kungälv.
And what made you come?
I was invited here by Lars Schmidt, the parents of Lars Schmidt, who lived at Lerum. And I'd never been to Sweden before. It was Christmas after the war, where we didn't have a very agreeable time, as you can have guessed by now. And it was a very full Christmas. I wasn't used to Swedish hospitality at all. And Lars Schmidt's father was a colonel, an överst of the Jämtlands Fältjägarregiment. And there was a dinner of 50 people. They were absolutely wonderful hospitality. But I had to take a lady into dinner who didn't understand English very well, unlike the audience, and it shows how things have developed. And I heard my own voice saying to her, yes, in England we have buses on 2 levels because there are people who like to and then I realized she wasn't listening to me. She was going, "Skål." I thought, my God. And then 49 people I had to go, and I didn't know Swedish manners yet, and I drank every time. Quite a lot. So by the time I had scolded about 30 people, I was beginning to get to the stage of inebriation where my eye became extremely sharp. You know, there is that moment before you... And I suddenly noticed that one of the gentlemen at the table had this button opened, or lost. It was turned back. And I remember thinking... And then I looked at his other sleeve, same thing. And I thought to myself, my God, it's very rare that one meets a gentleman who's lost 2 buttons. So I thought that's very odd. And I looked at another one, and he also had that button open. And I began to find that everybody had. And I had the suit I was given when I left the army, which they threw at me, judging my size. It was a terrible, terrible brown suit with, you could hardly move. It was so stiff, the cardboard inside the arms, all sorts of... And I felt, and mine weren't practical. I thought, my God, what a disgrace. This is a country where everybody has this button open, and I can't open mine. I tried to eat like... Suddenly, old Colonel Schmidt looked at me and said, "Skål, välkommen till Sverige." I said, "Oh, can I ask you a question, Colonel?" "Yes, of course." I said, "I can't help noticing that everybody has this button." "Should I have mine open?" He said, "No, no, you're not Swedish." I said, "What is the secret?" He said, "We in Sweden, in the regiment, will always have this button open till Finland comes back to us again." That was a sobering thought. I was drunk enough to say, "You mustn't lose any more territory." It can...
You have once, I think you have said, I believe you could have said that humor is just another way of being serious.
No, I didn't make any rash claims like that. It's the only way I know of being serious. I confined it to my own experience. I'm not suggesting it's your case at all.
You don't have to say it that way.
I wouldn't be so rude.
Anyway, you have in the work you do, I guess that you humor is always somewhere existing.
Well, you always see it everywhere. For instance, my wife and I were invited to the White House, and I didn't expect to find very much humor there. It was at the occasion of the state visit of the Prince of Wales and his wife. And I was sitting with all big banquet at small tables of 8. And the host at my table was Nancy Reagan. Very charming. And my immediate neighbor was a famous ballerina who seemed a little bit abstract. You know the way ballerinas can be at times. As though she had a greater predilection for flowers than for people. And suddenly we heard behind us the teaspoon against a glass. And there was standing... Can I stand up?
Oh, yes.
Well, I just want to raise my glass in this White House of ours to welcome the wonderful Prince of Wales and his lovely Lady David.
So the ballerina suddenly, she suddenly was transformed, and she treated me like a stolen bicycle. And she said, "What did he say?" I said, "Nothing. He's thinking of next weekend at Camp Diana." Well, that's where humor comes in with it, where you don't expect it at all. I thought it was a state dinner. The same thing happened to me in London with Mrs. Thatcher, when suddenly we were invited to lunch with Mrs. Thatcher. I'd never been invited before to 10 Downing Street. I know Ted Heath very well. I know quite a few of the old prime ministers. They've never invited me. And suddenly this invitation to 10 Downing Street from Mrs. Thatcher. I couldn't understand what happened. And then I realized it coincided with the state visit of Mrs. Finnbogadottir, the president of Iceland, another lady. And then I remembered, of course, that there had been this cod war between Britain and Iceland, in which warships, small warships, had nudged each other north of the Arctic Circle as a kind of wet run for the Falkland Islands. And there had been no connection between Britain and Iceland since. And Mrs. Finnbogadottir was coming over to England to try and smooth everything over as though the whole thing was now forgotten. And I suddenly realized, because I was in Iceland seeing a play of mine, which they were performing at the National Theatre. It was I don't want to boast, but it was an enormous success. It ran 4 nights, which for Reykjavik is a very long run, as you know. And I remember very well because Mrs. Finnbogadottir at that time was not yet president. She was still the secretary of the National Theatre. And so I went to her during rehearsals and said, "Mrs. Finnbog," "Yes?" I said, "Do you think you give me a seat for the first night in the middle of a row? And it's usual for an author on a first night to sit on the aisle where he can get out quickly for various reasons, either to go backstage or to get out of the theatre, according to the mood of the public." She said, "What ticket have I give you?" I said, "You give me H8. "Oh, yes, that's in the middle of a row. I can give you K1. I said, "That's marvelous." "Yes, there, thank you." "Oh, give me H8 back, I can still sell it." So we forgot that brief encounter was much more important than I could have imagined. Because since Mrs. Finnbogadottir had become president in the interim, as the war was declared, she knew nobody in England, except me, or 1 or 2 others probably, but I was among the only ones she remembered because of KH1. And so I was on her list for lunch. And I arrived at lunch with my wife, and we sat on a small table facing Mrs. Thatcher, who is not very good at disguising her emotions, and who couldn't understand what we were doing there, and kept looking at me with a kind of... And eventually she couldn't bear the tension any longer, and she said, "What are you doing here?" And I explained the whole business of the tickets and so on. And Mrs. Finnbogadottir was awfully sweet. She said, "Yes, K1. H8. And so that when we got to the dessert, Mrs. Thatcher was in a slightly sunnier mood. You could see that she was trying to make up for the abrasiveness. And she suddenly said, in a fit of generosity, "Why don't we see you here more often?" I said, "Because the president of Iceland doesn't come here that often."
And you've been You've been knighted.
Yes.
How does that, how is that procedure?
Well, first of all, they send you a little printed card, which has 2 questions on it, which you must strike out the one which doesn't apply, like, and it says, number 1, I can kneel. Number 2, I can't kneel. And they make no provision for people that can kneel but can't get up again. So I telephoned them and they said it would be all right. And then it's a very, very English procedure, of course, because it's both very solemn and with a kind of strange tongue in the cheek, because when you're actually kneeling in front of the Queen, she puts the sword on your shoulder and then lifts it extremely high before she puts it on the other shoulder, which suggests that there has been a calamity at some time, and she's decided not to run the risk again. But when you're actually kneeling, there's a military band which is playing in very strict military rhythm. I could hardly recognize it, my mind was on other things, but they were playing I'm Going to Get That Man Right Out of My Hair, South Pacific, which I thought was a strange choice.
You never played any instruments, but you play them all,
Well, I found I could do them better without the instrument. And since I've seen small women struggling onto buses with double basses, I thought, is it worth it? It's much better to...
You once did a whole chamber concerto without...
Well, I still do. I do Bach, cantata, and all sorts of...
Would you like to try that?
Bach? Is it solemn enough here? Yes, of course it is, yes. It's a Bach cantata called Lieber Gott, sei doch nicht bös. It's recently discovered in Eisenach from the east. It's made now possible. Yeah. And it's performed by the Kammerchor from the Museum der Musikwissenschaft pro Musica Antica in Kassel. It's the largest collection of musical fragments in the world. Perhaps even in Europe. And it starts with the aria of the contralto, Ach lieber Gott, sei doch nicht bös. Then comes the recitativo of the evangelist. Die kleinen Propheten kamen alle nach Gothenburg. The minor prophets all came to Gothenburg. And it ends with a Gloria, which is unfinished, but is one of the jewels of early German music.
Need tuning?
That's the reed without the oboe. Tusen tack.
Ach, lieber Gott, ach, lieber Gott, sei doch nicht ach, lieber Gott, ach, lieber Gott, sei doch nicht bös. Und am dritten Tag sagte der Herr, hier komme ich nicht weiter. Ich gehe, die kleinen Propheten kamen alle nach Gothenburg in Schweden und da kamen sie alle. Gloria,
Must be cheap. You can save a lot of musicians that way.
Yes, they're always going on strike because of me.
What do you think of the situation now in Russia and the whole new...
Well, the Russians have been open enough to say that, to declare at last, that Brezhnev had been clinically dead for 6 months before he died. But they haven't yet been open enough to admit that he's still walking around Moscow now, trying to find his office among all the shambles. But otherwise, I think the situation is very, very intriguing, to say the least of it. I'm the president of the Federation for the Support of Perestroika outside Russia. The president inside is Yakovlev, whom I know quite well and is the most estimable of those people, the most solid. He was the ambassador in Ottawa before.
But was this something you expected would happen, or?
Yeah, I hoped it would, and I wrote about it even. I guessed right. When I first wrote a book about Russia, I was accused by everybody at the time of being either naive, a fellow traveler, a sympathizer with communism, and that. I didn't have to do anything. I was proved right, and now I've become an expert on the Soviet Union. I've had to address the Royal Society for International Affairs on the subject of Russia today, and even been invited by the Staff College in London to lecture on the traditions of the Red Army. I declined because I don't like any army, and but it's so stupid, if you come to think of it. Just because I said something a little bit before the others, because I was attacked, everybody now thinks, well, he must know. Tell me, what about the stock exchange in Leningrad?
But you've worked a lot with UNICEF for many years.
Yes.
When did that start?
Oh, that started in 68, 69, 68, between the two.
What made you
I was invited to host, as it were, be the master of ceremonies of a big concert in Paris at the Odeon with many different ballet companies and orchestras. I thought, what is this organization that inspires this amount of goodwill? And it started, of course, as all these things do, with the Polish national ballet, the Mazowsze, dancing Polish folk song, mountaineers dance, the men with top hats with feathers and axes. And they started the usual Polish, and then with one thing, the man with an axe cut through my microphone cable. And I had to scream for the rest of the evening. The Odeon was an enormous theater. They didn't have time to repair it, and I just talked very loud, and I ended up with no voice, but much happier. And so then, since then, I've been with UNICEF all the time. But it's been very interesting at times. You meet some very, very interesting situations. I think I told you in Kenya, in a children's hospital, with 102 children, permanent, all the beds are always full, only 2 doctors for 102 children. And one of the doctors is always somewhere in the provinces dealing with outbreaks of something. And one nurse, majestic woman, a black woman, with 6 children, all from different husbands, I think because they had no television at the time. And very, very proud woman. And we brought her some new equipment, which was, of course, wrong. It always is. It was designed for the Arctic. And in Africa, everything had to be changed. But it was a sterilizing equipment. And she was fascinated and then said to me suddenly, you know, when we receive, and they have in this hospital no oxygen, no x-rays, and no ambulance. They have one of the earliest Volkswagen Beetles, to which the dying person has to climb into the back seat to be driven. Terrifying. And she said to me, you know, when we receive a new piece of equipment like this, I shut myself in my room for some time to meditate in order to try and force into my mind what conditions were like before we got the piece of equipment, so that when eventually we will be overtaken by modernity, by progress, we won't lose our way as you have done. And I said to the doctor, how do you cope with all these illnesses? He said, we're saved by the fact that here in Africa we have far fewer illnesses than you do, and therefore it's much easier to diagnose. We don't need x-rays. We know already what it is. I suppose AIDS has struck a new note, but apart from that, it's all, the possibilities are terribly small.
Which quality in a human do you find the most important?
I think tolerance, because it's an emotion, it's a quality of strength. Everybody thinks that tolerance is weakness. It isn't. You have to be awfully strong to be tolerant. And you have to be in the middle of things too, not on an extreme. And I think it's a metaphysical problem. The high notes and the dark notes of the piano are much more dramatic than middle C. And gray is not as dramatic a color as black and white. So I always admire people who take the middle course, which is the balanced course, and not some extreme, which is too easy.
That means for your children, you would like them to be tolerant, and you would be tolerant with them in their...
Yes, well, I always have been, because I think it's an essential part of nature. I don't think it's absolutely useless to tell children what to do. It's much better to behave the way that you want them to behave and let them copy you.
So do they imitate you?
I don't know. It's too late now. They're all enormous. They're very old, all of them. I think so. I think there are many qualities which are wonderful and many qualities which are not. But in my new book, I point out that so many people in the history of the world have been persecuted for what they thought, which is really nobody's business. And very few people have been punished for what they did. Well, the whole Inquisition is because what are you thinking? You must be burnt because you're thinking the wrong thing. But some other monster kills thousands of people, like Saddam Hussein, if you wish. Nothing happens at all. But they're still worried about what people think. I think they shouldn't. I think that we should be able to think exactly what we like. And very often somebody that is not a believer but helps an old lady across the road is a better Christian than somebody who's hurrying to church and doesn't see the old lady.
You've won 2 Oscars and 3 Emmys at least, and you've been knighted. You even in my show. How do you like that? Yes. But is there anything?
A fellow scholar.
Yes. Is there anything that you think you would still want to achieve?
No. I just like to do what I do better than I do it. But I don't think I want to achieve anything. I should hate to be in 10 Downing Street or anywhere else. I mean, politicians, there are some very interesting ones and some very noble characters, but they have to make too many compromises. I'd find that awfully difficult. So in a way, I'm escaping responsibility because that's a very difficult decisions to have to make. And there are some of them that I've known, like Sir Stafford Cripps in London or Helmut Schmidt, who seems to want to make every day the perfect one, but by midday it's already too late to know. So we'll put it off till tomorrow. So those are very human characters.
And you've been doing so many different things. You mean you've been setting up operas and...
Setting them up.
Setting, what do you say, setting?
That sounds as if I move the scenery.
You probably did that as well. But you've been directing operas.
Director, yes. Instructeur, I think it is in Danish, isn't it?
But you also do an opera without with any other cast than yourself.
Well, I mean, a sort of Italian opera.
Yes. How about? Can we hear a little of that?
I'm not going to move this time. I think it's embarrassing. It gives it too much importance. But the kind of opera that... Oh, a little Mozart, early Mozart. She's in her room lamenting.
Oddio, lui è partito. Oh, bello, bello, cosa vuole, oh, cosa vuole.
Then he comes into the garden.
Oh Dio, ho sentito un rumore questa parte. Oh Dio, zitto, zitto. Mascalzone, cosa vuole? Non zitto, non va a sentire niente. Sì, lui è parlato. Io non so niente. Che ne fa? Finora in Svezia 22, anche in Liechtenstein solamente uno. Ah, bello. Sono di ritorno, oh, son di ritorno. Oh, ha visto? Ah, amore. Oh, Dio mio padre. Apri la porta.
And that's where the fragment ends.
How many languages do you speak?
False Italian, false German, false Norwegian, also false Danish. I speak Danish well enough to read the Berlingske Tidende.
And for real, French?
French I have to speak at home. My wife is French. When I'm very tired, I speak English with a French accent. She understands that.
That's also the accent you use as Hercule Poirot.
Yes, more or less. In fact, when I call my wife, I say when she's not in, she leaves I say I'm in Gothenburg. There are many suspects up here, and I expect to effect an arrest by tonight, in which case I will be home tomorrow. She understands.
You can also impersonate dogs.
Yes, I was visit to a very unpleasant restaurant in Germany where I got no service. It was in the garden. It was summer. I tried every time the waiter passed. And I sat there. He served everybody else. And so eventually I thought I must do something to attract his attention. I went, "Whoa!" He came immediately and said, "I'm sorry, sir, dogs are not allowed in this restaurant." I said, "But he's really so, he's really so harmless. He's perfectly all right." "I'm sorry, sir, if we make an exception in one case, we must make an exception in all the cases." And I said, "Oh, come on." "Where is he?" They looked under every table. It's my revenge. So yes, dogs are very useful sometimes. I do it also in UNICEF for children, because what are you going to say to children from Central Africa that don't speak any language that you know? And they've been dressed up specially and washed so that they meet this, whatever it is. And you feel such an idiot. And so instead of speaking, I bark. As I would look at the children, I change slightly. They look alarmed. And then suddenly, the children run away. The children come back slowly and then gradually they get courage and they begin to get on your back, and when there are more than 10 of them, it becomes unpleasant. So then I have to become something else very quickly. And the most extraordinary experience I had of that kind was in China. There's something about Chinese children. All children are very different from each other and wonderful. But Chinese children have a kind of serenity, perhaps because they've been there for so long. Not the children, the Chinese, I mean. And they're absolutely open. And I decided after 2 hours of this, when I had practically no voice left, I decided to try and be a dove and a taube. What's that in Swedish?
Taube?
Duva. No.
Yeah,
So it's difficult to project that for 400 children, but they were all there ready. And I went, and 400 Chinese children turned in the same direction to watch the imaginary bird. I don't know what I did to this day to justify this sort of communal action. They must have heard it in the same way, but it was a wonderful experience. That shows that on these travels, you always have much more to learn than you have to teach.
Have you ever dealt with the Japanese?
Oh, yeah. Very often. We went to Japan. I took my wife because I thought she ought to see Japan. And I had to make a speech for the High Commissioner of Refugees, who was ill. So that had to be in Osaka. And so we arrived in Tokyo, and the head of the Japanese Welcome Committee said,
Tomorrow morning, we must leave from hotel at 8 o'clock sharp. That means that you gotta be in the hall of hotel at 8:51 with the baggage, which means since you're on 16th floor, you gotta be in lift with the luggage at 8:44. Which means that you have to leave your room at 8:39, which means that we call you at 7:34 to inform you you got 5-minute rest.
My wife said, "I can't deal in parts of 5 minutes. I mean, it's impossible." I said, well, calm. And we got to Osaka, and they said to me, "We have set aside 45 minutes for your speech." I said, 45 minutes? About refugees, it'll lose all its punch. I can't talk that long.
Oh. We have set aside 45 minutes.
I spoke for 26 minutes, but I didn't know that they were 19 minutes behind their schedule, and I put them exactly on again. They said,
How you know?
and then afterwards there was a very, very touching thing, because there was a Japanese Nobel Prize winner in science, natural science, chemistry and natural science, who spoke after me, and he took an enormous amount of time making preparations where everybody's sitting, waiting.
Oh. So there, so you go now. Another one.
And he went on forever. He went, and I thought, this is impossible. And eventually he started to speak.
Ode! Ode, 소영이요. 아니, 둘이만 소영이거든요.
And I thought, I can't believe it. So I turned on to the English translation, and it was a Japanese lady doing it. And it was really very heartbreaking, because she said, I first started taking interest in science when I was taken out by my father. My father was a difficult character with antisocial tendency and made it difficult to find friends. And his one passion in life was the game of golf. He lived for golf. My mother died when I was only 8 years old. And my father was impatient for me to go bigger so that I could play golf with him. And when I was 15 years old, he took me for the first time on golf course and told me I got to address ball. And unfortunately for my father, when I looked down, I found I was not so interested in the ball as in the grass which surrounded it. And he became, as a consequence, professor of chemistry and natural sciences. Because before his father had asked him to look at a ball, he'd never noticed the grass.
What is that stuff around the ball?
How about if you play balalaika?
Yeah.
And I play guitar. How about that?
Well,
Want to give it a try?
Yeah, just hand me the balalaika, will you?
You already got it.
what are you going to play?
Kalienka.
I've got it in Ivanov's arrangement.
for a Spanish song.
Yes.
A Swedish Spanish.
A Swedish song, all right.
La mujer con el toro muerte. El toro muerte en Uddevalla. La mujer rubio de Gotemburg.
I want to thank you very much for
Thank
coming.
you very much. I've never felt more Swedish. You asked me what I felt. Ja, tusen tack.
Thank you very, very much. It was
Ingenting.
lovely.